In a small, peaceful town surrounded by gentle hills and thick forests, life moved at a slow pace. The people were friendly, the air was fresh, and everyone knew each other by name. Among the residents was Emily Carter, a kind-hearted woman in her early 30s who had always been close to her mother, Margaret. Margaret wasn't just a mother. She was the glue that held their family together. She had a way of making even the darkest days seem brighter with her warm smile and wise words. Her presence was like sunshine, always comforting and full of hope. Margaret had spent most of her life caring for others. Whether it was helping neighbors in need, volunteering at the local church, or simply being there for her children, she gave selflessly without expecting anything in return. But life isn't fair, and sometimes even the strongest souls face challenges they can't overcome. For Margaret, that challenge came in the form of cancer, a relentless disease that slowly drained her strength over the years. Despite countless treatments and unwavering support from her family, the illness eventually took its toll. One quiet evening, surrounded by her loved ones, Margaret passed away peacefully, leaving behind a void no one could ever fill. Emily struggled to come to terms with the loss. Her mother had been her rock, her confidant, and her best friend all rolled into one. Now without her, everything felt different, emptier. Every corner of their home reminded her of Margaret. The kitchen where they baked cookies together, the living room where they laughed over old movies, and the garden where Margaret spent hours tending to her flowers. It was as if her absence left an invisible shadow over everything. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began preparing for the funeral. She wanted it to be perfect, a celebration of her mother's life rather than a somber goodbye. She sorted through old photographs, picked out Margaret's favorite hymns, and wrote a heartfelt eulogy. But as she worked on these preparations, she found herself wanting to do something more personal, something unique that would honor her mother in a special way. That's when the idea struck her. Emily remembered how much her mother loved staying connected with people. Margaret never missed a birthday call or a holiday message. Even during her toughest days battling cancer, she made sure to check in on friends and family regularly. Her phone was practically an extension of herself. So Emily decided to place an old flip phone inside the coffin, a simple yet meaningful gesture. It wasn't just any phone. It was one of Margaret's old devices, carefully preserved over the years. Emily spent hours recording voicemails onto the phone, gathering messages from friends, relatives, and even distant acquaintances who had known Margaret. Each recording was filled with love, laughter, and cherished memories. Some shared funny stories about Margaret's quirky habits, while others expressed gratitude for her kindness and generosity. By the time Emily finished, the phone was brimming with heartfelt tributes, a digital keepsake meant to symbolize the connection Margaret had shared with so many throughout her life. On the day of the funeral, the church was packed with mourners. Friends, neighbors, and extended family members gathered to pay their respects. The service was both tearful and joyful, capturing the essence of Margaret's vibrant spirit. Afterward, as the casket was lowered into the ground, Emily stood quietly, clutching the phone tightly in her hand before finally placing it gently inside the coffin. She whispered softly, "Mom, this is for you. So you're never alone." The moment felt surreal, almost dreamlike. As dirt was shoveled over the casket, sealing Margaret's final resting place, Emily couldn't shake the bittersweet emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, she felt comforted knowing she'd done something truly thoughtful for her mother. On the other hand, the reality of saying goodbye hit her hard. Life without Margaret seemed unimaginable. But Emily resolved to carry forward the lessons her mother had taught her, to live fully, love deeply, and cherish every moment. That night, as Emily returned home, she tried to distract herself by flipping through old photo albums. Memories flooded back with each turn of the page, bringing smiles and tears in equal measure. Yet, despite the warmth of those recollections, an unsettling feeling lingered in the pit of her stomach. Perhaps it was grief working its way through her system, or maybe it was something else entirely. Whatever it was, Emily couldn't quite put her finger on it. Little did she know, this uneasy sensation was only the beginning of a story that would unravel in ways she could never have anticipated. The day of the funeral had been emotionally draining for Emily. Saying goodbye to her mother in front of so many people felt like reliving the pain of her loss over and over again. The service had been beautiful, filled with heartfelt speeches, tears, and moments of laughter as friends and family shared their favorite memories of Margaret. But now, as the evening settled in and the house grew quiet, Emily found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the burial. She sat on the edge of her bed in the room she'd grown up in, surrounded by familiar sights. Her old school trophies on the shelf, faded posters still clinging to the walls, and stacks of books that had once been her escape from the world. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, casting faint shadows across her curtains. Emily tried to distract herself by flipping through an old photo album, but every picture only reminded her of how much she missed her mom. Just as she was about to close the book and turn off the light, a sharp, buzzing noise pierced the stillness. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her phone vibrating on the nightstand next to her. At first, she thought it might be a late-night text or call from one of her relatives checking in after the long day. But when she reached for the device, what she saw made her blood run cold. The screen displayed an incoming call, not from any number she recognized, but from the very same phone she had placed inside her mother's coffin just hours earlier. For a moment, Emily froze, staring at the glowing digits as if they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less alarming. But they didn't. The caller ID clearly showed the number belonging to the old flip phone she had carefully tucked away alongside her mother's final resting place. Her mind raced with questions. Was this some kind of cruel prank? Had someone tampered with the phone before she placed it in the coffin? Or worse, could it have been stolen and reactivated by someone who stumbled upon it? None of these explanations seemed likely or satisfying. After all, who would go to such lengths to play a joke like this? And even if someone did, how could they possibly know which phone she had chosen to bury? Shaking her head, Emily dismissed the thought as paranoia creeping in during an already difficult time. Still, curiosity got the better of her. Hesitantly, she tapped the answer button and brought the phone to her ear. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response, just static, faint and crackling, like the sound of distant radio waves trying to find a signal. She waited a few seconds longer, straining to hear anything beyond the eerie noise. Just as she was about to hang up, a soft, indistinct murmur came through the line. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, but it was unmistakably human. Emily's breath hitched. She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it again, half expecting the call to disconnect. Instead, the faint murmuring continued, growing louder and more insistent. Panic began to rise in her chest. She ended the call abruptly and set the phone down on the nightstand, her hands shaking. What had she just heard? It couldn't be real. It shouldn't be real. Phones don't work underground, especially not old flip phones without power sources. And yet here she was, sitting in her childhood bedroom, grappling with the impossible. She told herself it must have been a glitch, a crossed signal, or maybe even a dream. Sleep deprivation and grief were playing tricks on her mind. That had to be it. With that thought, she turned off her phone, crawled under the covers, and forced herself to close her eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, flashes of the glowing screen and the unsettling murmurs replayed in her mind. Finally, unable to ignore the gnawing sense of dread, Emily picked up her phone again and checked the call log. Sure enough, there it was, the incoming call from the buried phone, time-stamped just minutes ago. This wasn't her imagination. It was real. Her stomach churned as she scrolled through the details, searching for any clue that might explain what was happening. The call had lasted exactly 42 seconds. Why hadn't she hung up sooner? As the reality of the situation sank in, Emily's fear morphed into determination. If someone was messing with her, she needed answers, and fast. She grabbed her coat, slipped on her shoes, and headed outside, determined to confront whatever or whoever was behind this bizarre occurrence. The cemetery wasn't far from her house, and though it was late, the streets were eerily quiet. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale, silvery light over everything. Each step toward the graveyard felt heavier than the last, her anxiety building with every passing second. When she arrived at the gates of the cemetery, Emily hesitated. The rows of headstones looked different in the moonlight, almost ghostly. Shadows danced among the trees, and the air carried a chill that sent shivers down her spine. Swallowing her fear, she pushed forward, navigating the winding paths until she reached her mother's grave. The freshly dug earth was still visible, a stark reminder of the finality of death. Kneeling beside the mound, Emily hesitated, unsure of what she hoped or feared to find. She didn't want to disturb the sanctity of the site, but the unanswered questions plaguing her mind left her no choice. Slowly, carefully, she began, brushing away loose dirt from the edges of the grave, peering into the darkness below. Her hands trembled as she worked, dirt caking under her nails. Then, just as she started to doubt whether she'd find anything at all, her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. Her pulse quickened. Digging faster now, she uncovered the object, a small, rectangular shape, partially buried, beneath the soil. It was the phone. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she lifted it free. The screen was cracked but still functional, its faint glow illuminating her face in the dim light. Against all logic, the battery icon showed full charge. How was that possible? Even if the phone somehow retained power, it shouldn't have been able to connect to a network underground. Yet here it was, working as if nothing unusual had happened. Trembling, Emily unlocked the device and checked the call history. What she saw made her heart sink. Dozens of missed calls were logged, each originating from numbers she didn't recognize. They spanned different area codes and formats, some local and others international. It was as though the phone had become a magnet for unknown callers. Unable to resist, Emily tapped on one of the voicemails and pressed play. At first, there was only silence, followed by faint background noises, whispers, footsteps, and what sounded like distant crying. Then a distorted voice emerged, barely intelligible but undeniably human. "Help me," it rasped, sending chills down Emily's spine. She stopped the recording immediately, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Who or what was reaching out to her? And why had it chosen her mother's grave as a conduit? Standing there in the cold, clutching the mysterious device, Emily realized this wasn't just a random malfunction or a cruel prank. Something far stranger and far darker was unfolding. Whatever secrets lay hidden within the phone, she knew she couldn't face them alone. As she turned to leave the cemetery, her resolve hardened. She would uncover the truth no matter where it led her. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling as though she hadn't slept at all. Her mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions and unsettling images that refused to fade. The events of the previous night played over and over in her head. The glowing screen, the eerie voicemail. The phone mysteriously charged despite being buried underground. It felt like a nightmare, but the cold weight of the device sitting on her kitchen table reminded her that it was all too real. She stared at it, willing herself to believe it was just some elaborate hoax. But deep down, she knew better. Something inexplicable was happening, and she couldn't ignore it. Determined to make sense of what was going on, Emily decided to dig deeper into the history of the cemetery where her mother was laid to rest. If there was any chance this strange phenomenon had something to do with the location itself, she needed to find out. Armed with a notebook and a thermos of coffee, she headed to the local library, a quaint brick building nestled in the heart of town. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with books about the town's history, folklore, and notable figures from decades past. Emily approached the librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper, who had lived in the town for most of her life. With her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose and a warm smile etched across her face, Mrs. Harper was known for her vast knowledge of local stories and legends. Emily explained her situation cautiously, leaving out the more bizarre details about the phone calls. Instead, she framed her inquiry as curiosity about the cemetery's history. "Do you know if anything unusual has ever happened there?" Emily asked, trying to sound casual. Maybe some old stories or myths tied to the land. Mrs. Harper adjusted her glasses and leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Well, now that you mention it, she began, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. There are a few tales. People say the cemetery wasn't always used for burials. Back in the early 1900s, part of the land was said to be cursed. Some folks claimed they heard strange noises coming from the woods nearby. Whispers, footsteps, even screams late at night. There were also rumors of graves being disturbed, though no one could ever prove anything. Emily's stomach tightened as she listened. Were there any specific areas people avoided? She pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. There's a section near the back, close to your mother's plot, actually. They call it the Hollow. It's where some of the oldest graves are located. Not many people visit that area anymore because, well, let's just say it has a reputation. A lot of those graves aren't marked properly either. Some say the spirits of those buried there can't move on. The word sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Could that explain why the phone had become a conduit for these mysterious calls? Was there someone, or something, trapped between worlds, using the device as a way to communicate? The thought was both terrifying and heartbreaking. Whoever, or whatever, it was clearly needed help. But how could Emily possibly assist them? After thanking Mrs. Harper for her time, Emily left the library with a mix of determination and unease swirling inside her. She drove home, her mind racing with possibilities. By the time she arrived, the phone had already started ringing again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She answered immediately, her hands trembling as she held it to her ear. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the same distorted voice from before spoke, clearer this time but still difficult to understand. "Let me out," it whispered, each word laced with desperation. "I'm trapped." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but the line went dead before she could respond. Frustrated and frightened, she set the phone down and paced around the room, trying to process what she'd just heard. Whoever was reaching out wasn't her mother, that much was certain. But who were they? And why had they chosen Margaret's grave as a means of communication? Realizing she couldn't handle this alone, Emily reached out to an old friend named Daniel. They had grown up together, but their paths had diverged after high school. While Emily pursued a career in marketing, Daniel had developed an interest in paranormal investigations, fueled by his fascination with unsolved mysteries and unexplained phenomena. Though skeptical at first, he agreed to meet her when she explained the situation. That evening, Daniel arrived at Emily's house carrying a duffel bag filled with equipment, digital recorders, EMF detectors, cameras, and even a Ouija board, which he admitted he rarely used but kept just in case. He listened intently as Emily recounted everything that had happened so far, his brow furrowing with concern. "This is wild," he said finally, shaking his head. "But I've seen weirder things in my line of work. Let's go check it out." Together, they returned to the cemetery under the cover of darkness. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, but the atmosphere felt heavy, almost oppressive. As they approached Margaret's grave, Emily noticed the air growing colder, sending goosebumps rippling across her skin. Daniel set up his equipment while Emily clutched the phone tightly, half expecting it to ring again at any moment. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The devices recorded nothing unusual, and the silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Just as Emily began to wonder if they were wasting their time, the phone buzzed violently in her hand. Startled, she dropped it, and the screen lit up once more. This time, instead of a single call, multiple notifications flooded in. Texts, missed calls, and voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. Daniel quickly retrieved the phone and plugged it into one of his recording devices. "We need to listen to these messages," he said, his tone serious. One by one, they played back the voicemails. Each contained fragments of cryptic warnings, pleas for help, and mentions of names and places Emily didn't recognize. Some voices sounded angry, others desperate, but all carried an undeniable sense of urgency. As they pieced together the information, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the messages referenced a woman named Clara, describing her as someone who had died tragically decades ago. According to the fragmented accounts, Clara had been wrongfully accused of a crime she didn't commit and had taken her own life. Shortly afterward, her body was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere within the cemetery, forgotten by everyone except perhaps the restless spirit that lingered behind. Emily felt a pang of sorrow for Clara. How lonely it must have been, stuck between worlds without anyone to hear her cries for help. But if they were going to put her soul to rest, they needed to find her grave. With Daniel's help, Emily vowed to uncover the truth, not just for Clara, but for her own peace of mind. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. This mystery was far from over. The next morning, Emily and Daniel sat at Emily's kitchen table, surrounded by maps, notes, and photographs of the cemetery. The previous night's discoveries had left them both shaken but resolute. They now knew that the strange calls weren't random. They were connected to a woman named Clara, whose tragic story had been lost to time. But finding her unmarked grave in a sprawling cemetery filled with centuries-old plots was no small task. It would take patience, research, and perhaps a little luck. Daniel pulled out his laptop and began cross-referencing old town records with the information they'd gathered from the voicemails. Meanwhile, Emily reached out to Mrs. Harper again, hoping the librarian might have additional insights into Clara's life, or death. When she arrived at the library, Mrs. Harper greeted her warmly, though there was a flicker of concern in her eyes when Emily mentioned Clara's name. "Clara Bennett?" Mrs. Harper murmured thoughtfully, tapping her chin. "Yes, I remember reading about her once, poor girl. She lived during a difficult time. Early 1920s, I think. There was a scandal involving her family, something about stolen money or missing valuables. People accused her of being involved, though no one could prove anything. Not long after, she disappeared. Some say she ran away, others believe. Well, let's just say not everyone believes she left willingly." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Do you know where she was buried?" Mrs. Harper shook her head sadly. "If there was a burial, it wasn't documented properly. Back then, unmarked graves weren't uncommon, especially for those who couldn't afford proper funerals or whose families didn't want to draw attention." Though disappointed, Emily thanked Mrs. Harper and returned home, more determined than ever. If official records wouldn't lead them to Clara's resting place, they'd have to rely on other methods. That evening, Emily and Daniel devised a plan. They would revisit the cemetery, focusing specifically on the Hollow, the area Mrs. Harper had described as cursed. Armed with flashlights, notebooks, and Daniel's paranormal equipment, they prepared for another trip into the unknown. The air grew colder as they approached the cemetery that night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rows of weathered headstones. The Hollow was easy enough to find. It was darker and quieter than the rest of the grounds, almost as if nature itself avoided the spot. Weeds sprouted wildly between cracked stones, many of which were so worn down that their inscriptions were illegible. It was a place forgotten by time, and perhaps by humanity. As they walked among the graves, Daniel used his EMF detector to scan for anomalies. The device emitted faint beeping sounds, growing louder as they moved deeper into the area. "This is promising," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "EMF spikes can indicate paranormal activity." Emily nodded, clutching the phone tightly in her hand. It hadn't rung since the previous night, but she kept expecting it to buzz at any moment. She glanced around nervously, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking nearby. Instead, all she saw were the silent, stoic graves standing like sentinels in the darkness. Suddenly, the phone lit up again. This time, instead of ringing, it displayed a series of coordinates, a string of numbers that seemed to correspond to GPS locations. Daniel's eyes widened as he grabbed the phone. "These look like map coordinates," he said excitedly. "Let me plug them into my phone." Moments later, Daniel's phone revealed a pinpoint location within the cemetery, just a few dozen yards away from where they stood. Heart racing, Emily followed him as they navigated through the uneven terrain until they reached the exact spot indicated by the coordinates. There, hidden beneath thick ivy and tangled roots, was a small, crumbling stone marker. Unlike the other graves, this one bore no name or date, only a faint etching of a flower. "This has to be it," Emily breathed, kneeling beside the marker. Her hands trembled as she brushed away dirt and leaves, revealing more of the faded design. Though there was no inscription, she felt certain this was Clara's final resting place. Daniel set up his equipment around the area, capturing readings and documenting everything meticulously. As he worked, the phone buzzed again, startling them both. A new voicemail appeared on the screen. With bated breath, Emily pressed play. This time the voice was clearer, not distorted or garbled like before. It was soft and sorrowful, tinged with desperation. "I didn't do it," the voice pleaded. "They blamed me, but I didn't do it. Please, tell them I'm sorry." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she listened. Whoever Clara had been, she had clearly suffered greatly in life, and perhaps even more in death. Her spirit lingered, unable to move on until someone acknowledged her pain and cleared her name. "We need to help her," Emily said firmly, turning to Daniel. "But how? We don't even know what really happened to her." Daniel nodded, thinking carefully. "We'll need to dig deeper, literally and figuratively. Let's start by looking for newspaper archives from the 1920s. There might be articles about the scandal Mrs. Harper mentioned, and we should also consult someone who knows about rituals for laying spirits to rest." Over the next few days, Emily and Daniel pored over microfiche reels at the library, searching for any mention of Clara Bennett. After hours of painstaking work, they finally found what they were looking for: a yellowed newspaper clipping dated March 14, 1923. The headline read, "Local Girl Vanishes Amid Family Scandal." The article detailed how Clara's father had been accused of embezzling funds from the town bank. When the money turned up missing, suspicion fell on the entire family. Clara, described as a shy and reserved young woman, became a target of gossip and accusations despite having no evidence against her. Shortly after the scandal broke, she vanished without a trace. Her body was discovered weeks later near the edge of the woods adjacent to the cemetery, ruled a suicide by hanging. The case was closed quickly, leaving behind unanswered questions and lingering resentment among the townsfolk. Armed with this knowledge, Emily and Daniel sought guidance from Father Michael, the kindly priest at the local church. Though initially skeptical, Father Michael agreed to assist them after hearing their story. He explained that while he couldn't perform an exorcism, as this wasn't a malevolent entity, he could conduct a blessing ceremony to honor Clara's memory and offer peace to her troubled soul. On the appointed night, Emily, Daniel, and Father Michael met at the cemetery. Candles were placed around Clara's grave, their flickering light casting warm glows against the cold darkness. Father Michael led the group in prayer, his voice steady and calming as he spoke words of forgiveness and redemption. Emily stepped forward, holding the phone in her hands. "Clara," she said softly, her voice trembling but sincere, "we know you didn't do what they accused you of. You were innocent, and we're sorry for the pain you endured. Please forgive us, and please find peace." As she spoke, the phone buzzed one last time. The screen lit up briefly, displaying a single message. "Thank you." Then, just as suddenly, the device powered off and stayed off. A heavy stillness settled over the group as they stood in silence. For the first time in days, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. Whatever weight had been pressing down on her chest seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet resolve. They had done what they could for Clara. Now, it was up to her to move on. The drive back to Emily's house was quiet, each of them lost in their thoughts. Though exhausted, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping Clara had reminded her of something important. Life is fleeting, but love and kindness endure. Even in death, connections matter. and sometimes all it takes is a little compassion to heal old wounds. When she finally crawled into bed that night, Emily slept soundly for the first time since her mother's passing. The phone lay silent. On her nightstand, its battery drained and its purpose fulfilled. Whatever mysteries remained buried in the earth, they no longer haunted her dreams. The following days passed in a blur for Emily. While the weight of Clara's unresolved tragedy had lifted somewhat after the blessing ceremony, she couldn't shake the feeling that their work wasn't entirely finished. There was still something, lingering, a sense of unfinished business that tugged at the edges of her mind. Though the phone remained silent and lifeless, Emily often found herself staring at it, half expecting it to buzz again with another cryptic message. She tried to convince herself that everything was over, that Clara's spirit had finally found peace, but deep down she knew better. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel called. His voice was urgent, tinged with excitement and concern. "Emily, I think we missed something," he said without preamble. "I've been going over the recordings from the cemetery and there's a detail we overlooked." Her heart skipped a beat. "What kind of detail?" she asked, gripping the phone tighter. "There's a name mentioned in one of the voicemails, someone who might have been involved in framing Clara. If we can track this person down, or at least find out more about them, it could give us closure. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help put the rest of this to bed." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to leave well enough alone. After all, they'd already done so much. But another part, a stronger, more determined part, knew she couldn't walk away until every loose end was tied up. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it." The next morning, Emily met Daniel at his apartment, where he had spent hours poring over the audio files. He played the recording for her, a faint, distorted voice whispering, "Ask about Thomas Hargrove." The name sent a chill down Emily's spine. It sounded familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. Daniel explained that he'd done some preliminary research and discovered that Thomas Hargrove had been a prominent figure in the town during the 1920s, a banker no less. "Think about it," Daniel said, pacing back and forth. "If Clara's father was accused of stealing money from the bank, and Hargrove was the banker in charge, don't you think it's possible he played a role in what happened? Maybe he framed Clara's family to cover up his own mistakes, or worse." Emily nodded slowly, piecing things together in her mind. If Hargrove had manipulated the situation to protect himself, then Clara's death wasn't just a tragic accident or misunderstanding. It was the result of deliberate malice. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also fueled her determination. They owed it to Clara and to themselves to uncover the truth. With renewed purpose, Emily and Daniel dove back into their investigation. They started by visiting the local historical society, a small building tucked away on the outskirts of town. Inside, shelves groaned under the weight of dusty ledgers, faded photographs, and crumbling documents. A volunteer named Mr. Peterson greeted them warmly and offered to help when they explained their search for information about Thomas Hargrove. After rifling through stacks of papers, they stumbled upon a treasure trove of records related to the bank scandal. Among them was a handwritten letter addressed to the town council, signed by none other than Thomas Hargrove. In it, he vehemently denied any wrongdoing while accusing Clara's father of embezzlement. The tone of the letter was defensive, almost desperate, an indication that perhaps Hargrove had something to hide. But the real breakthrough came when they discovered an old newspaper clipping buried within the archives. It detailed how Hargrove had abruptly resigned from his position at the bank shortly after the scandal broke. Rumors swirled that he had mismanaged funds and attempted to shift the blame onto someone else. However, due to lack of evidence, or perhaps fear of tarnishing the town's reputation, the matter was swept under the rug. "This is it," Daniel said, tapping the article excitedly. "Hargrove covered his tracks, but not completely. If we dig deeper, we might find proof that he framed Clara's family." Their next step was to locate Hargrove's descendants. If anyone knew the truth about his past, it would likely be passed down through generations. Using public records, they traced the family tree to a woman named Evelyn Hargrove, who lived in a nearby city. After a brief phone call, Evelyn agreed to meet them, intrigued by their request. Evelyn turned out to be a sharp-witted woman in her 60s with piercing blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Over tea in her cozy living room, Emily and Daniel carefully explained their findings, leaving out the supernatural elements to avoid alarming her. To their surprise, Evelyn listened intently, nodding along as if she'd suspected something like this all along. "My grandfather was always a complicated man," Evelyn admitted, sighing heavily. "He rarely spoke about his time in banking, but when he did, there was a bitterness in his voice. My grandmother once told me he carried guilt to his grave, though she never said why." She paused, studying Emily and Daniel closely. "You say this involves a young woman named Clara? Do you have any proof?" Daniel handed her copies of the newspaper clippings and the letter. Evelyn examined them silently, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with sadness. "This changes everything," she whispered. "If my grandfather wrongfully accused her family, then he destroyed innocent lives." Evelyn promised to help however she could, offering access to her family's private archives. Together they uncovered a series of personal journals written by Thomas Hargrove. The entries revealed a man plagued by paranoia and regret. In one particularly damning passage, he admitted to fabricating evidence against Clara's father to divert attention from his own financial mismanagement. The confession was veiled in vague language, but the implication was clear. Armed with this newfound evidence, Emily and Daniel returned to the cemetery, accompanied by Evelyn. They stood before Clara's grave, the candles from the previous ceremony still flickering softly in the wind. Evelyn stepped forward, clutching a framed apology written in her own hand. "Clara," she began, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "On behalf of my family, I am so sorry for what was done to you. My grandfather betrayed your trust and your innocence, and for that I beg your forgiveness. You deserved better, not just in life but in death." As Evelyn spoke, the air around them seemed to shift. The oppressive heaviness that had lingered for days dissipated, replaced by an almost palpable sense of calm. Emily glanced at Daniel, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. Whatever doubts either of them had harbored about whether they'd truly helped Clara vanished in that moment. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. For the first time since her mother's passing, she allowed herself to grieve fully, not just for Margaret but for Clara as well. Two women, separated by decades, yet connected by the same desire for justice and understanding. Emily realized that helping Clara had been a way of honoring her mother's memory too. Margaret had always taught her to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves, to seek truth even when it was uncomfortable, and to show compassion in the face of adversity. The phone on her nightstand remained silent, its screen dark and unresponsive. It was nothing more than an ordinary object now, a relic of a journey that had changed Emily forever. As she drifted off to sleep, she smiled faintly, knowing that somewhere, somehow, Clara had finally found the peace she deserved. In the days that followed, Emily found herself reflecting deeply on everything that had happened. The events surrounding Clara's spirit and the mysterious phone calls had left an indelible mark on her life. It wasn't just about solving a supernatural mystery or righting a decades-old wrong. It was about connection. Through her efforts to help Clara, Emily had reconnected with parts of herself she hadn't realized were missing. She felt closer to her mother too, as if Margaret's lessons of kindness, compassion, and resilience had guided her every step of the way. The town itself seemed different now, quieter but also lighter somehow. Though no one else knew the full story, there was a subtle shift in the air, a sense that something unresolved had finally been laid to rest. Even the cemetery, once an eerie and foreboding place, now felt peaceful and serene. When Emily visited her mother's grave, she noticed how vibrant the flowers looked, how the sunlight filtered through the trees in a way that seemed almost magical. It was as though nature itself was acknowledging the healing that had taken place. Evelyn Hargrove became a regular presence in Emily's life after their shared journey. The two women formed an unexpected friendship, bonding over their mutual desire to honor Clara's memory. Evelyn confided in Emily that confronting her grandfather's past had been cathartic for her as well. For years, she'd carried a vague sense of unease about her family's history, never quite able to put her finger on why. Now, with the truth out in the open, she felt a weight lifting, one she hadn't even fully acknowledged until it was gone. Together, Emily and Evelyn decided to take things a step further. They approached the town council with the evidence they'd uncovered, hoping to clear Clara's name officially. At first, the council members were hesitant, unsure of how to address something so long buried. But Evelyn's eloquence and Emily's heartfelt plea eventually won them over. A small plaque was commissioned and placed near the hollow, commemorating Clara Bennett and acknowledging the injustice she had suffered. It read, "In memory of Clara Bennett, 1901-1923, whose innocence was stolen by circumstance. May he." Her story reminds us of the importance of truth, forgiveness, and compassion. The unveiling ceremony drew a modest crowd, including Daniel, Mrs. Harper, Father Michael, and several townsfolk who had grown curious about the story. As Emily stood before the gathering, she spoke briefly about Clara's life and the lessons her tragic tale could teach them all. Her words resonated deeply, leaving many in attendance visibly moved. As weeks turned into months, Emily began to rebuild her life with a renewed sense of purpose. Helping Clara had awakened something within her, a passion for uncovering hidden stories and advocating for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Inspired by this newfound drive, she started volunteering at the local historical society, working alongside Mr. Peterson to preserve the town's forgotten histories. She discovered countless untold tales of resilience and courage, each one reminding her of Clara and her mother. Daniel, too, continued his work in paranormal investigations, though he joked that nothing would ever top the haunted flip phone case. Their partnership had strengthened during the ordeal, and they remained close friends, often collaborating on projects that combined their unique skills. Whether it was researching old legends or simply sharing coffee and conversation, they supported each other in ways neither had anticipated. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily returned to the cemetery, this time alone. She brought a bouquet of wildflowers, Margaret's favorites, and placed them gently on her mother's grave. Sitting cross-legged on the soft grass, she allowed herself to sit quietly, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. It was a moment of pure stillness, free from fear or uncertainty. "I miss you, Mom," she whispered, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "But I think you'd be proud of me. I've learned so much these past few months, not just about Clara, but about myself, and I know you're still with me, in your own way." A gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers. Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Whether it was her imagination or something more profound, she didn't question it. Instead, she let the moment wash over her, grateful for the love and guidance that continued to surround her. That evening, as Emily sat in her cozy living room flipping through an old photo album, she came across a picture of herself as a child, standing beside her mother in front of the very same garden where Margaret used to spend hours tending to her plants. The image brought tears to her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sorrow. She realized then that while death may take people away physically, their impact lives on in the hearts of those they leave behind. The phone, the source of so much mystery and turmoil, now sat tucked away in a drawer, its battery removed and its secrets sealed forever. Occasionally, Emily thought about donating it to a museum or preserving it as part of the town's history. But for now, it stayed where it was, a reminder of a journey that had changed her life in ways she never could have predicted. As she closed the photo album and turned off the lamp, Emily took a deep breath, savoring the quiet comfort of her home. The darkness outside held no fear for her anymore. Instead, it felt like a comforting embrace, a reminder that life, even in its most challenging moments, is filled with light, love, and endless possibilities. And as she drifted off to sleep, she whispered one last thank you to her mother, to Clara, and to the universe for guiding her through the shadows and into the light.